By 1956, the world's largest locomotive works stood silent, years after powering the Civil War, building engines for 6 continents and turning a humble 1825 Philadelphia workshop into America's industrial powerhouse. How did mastery over steam create such dominance? And why did Baldwin's empire unravel almost overnight? To uncover the real story behind this forgotten industrial giant, we have to start at the very beginning. In 1825, Matthias Baldwin opened the doors of a modest machine shop on South Broad Street in Philadelphia. The space was cramped, the tools simple, and the workforce small, just Baldwin himself and a handful of apprentices, most barely out of their teens. Their first jobs were not glamorous. They repaired pumps for city waterworks, machined gears for nearby iron foundries, and took on whatever odd contracts local businesses could offer. Each day started before sunrise, with the sharp ring of hammers and the hiss of steam from the little boiler Baldwin had built to power his lathes. Apprentices learned by doing, their hands blackened by oil and iron filings, their pay meager but steady. Baldwin was more than a boss. He was a craftsman and mentor, teaching his crew to measure twice and file once, to take pride in precision. Letters from the period show him reaching out to other Philadelphia mechanics and reformers, building a network that would prove vital in years to come. The shop's reputation for honest work and fair dealing spread quickly through the city. Yet even as Baldwin's team kept the city's machinery running, he could sense that something bigger was on the horizon. The city buzzed with talk of new railroads and iron horses, but for now, the little shop on South Broad Street remained focused on the work at hand, building a foundation, skill by skill, for whatever challenge might arrive next. In 1832, the workshop on South Broad Street took on a challenge that would change its fate forever. The Philadelphia, Germantown, and Norristown Railroad needed a locomotive built from scratch. No British imports, no borrowed designs. Baldwin and his small team set to work, piecing together what would become known as Old Ironsides. The machine was a 4-wheel cast iron giant by the standards of the day, with a boiler capable of holding pressure at 50 pounds per square inch. Each rivet, each gear, was the result of trial, error, and late nights spent in the glow of oil lamps. When Old Ironsides finally rolled out of the shop, local newspapers described its first run as a marvel. It pulled its train smoothly along the rails, proving not only that American shops could match European engineering, but that Baldwin's team was ready for something bigger. The railroad placed more orders almost immediately, and word spread quickly among other lines. Suddenly, the little shop that once fixed city pumps was at the heart of a new industry. Old Ironsides didn't just move freight. It moved Baldwin into the age of railroading, opening the door to a flood of demand that would soon test every limit of the shop's skill and ambition. By the 1850s, the pace inside Baldwin's workshop had transformed from measured craft to organized hustle. Steam-powered hoists swung heavy boilers into place, and rows of machinists filed parts to precise standards. As railroads stretched across the country, demand soared. Production figures tell the story. In 1852, Baldwin had turned out 500 locomotives. Less than a decade later, by the start of the Civil War in 1861, that number had doubled to 1,000. 7 years after that, the count reached 2,000. Each new order meant expanding the workforce, hundreds of new positions filled by skilled immigrants and local hands eager for steady work. The shop floor grew busier, with teams assigned to specialized tasks, streamlining the assembly process. Standardized parts replaced hand-fitted components, and daily output climbed. Ledgers from the period show not just engines built, but a company learning to manage scale, tracking hours, materials, and deliveries with the discipline of a modern factory. The shift from custom builds to systematized manufacturing gave Baldwin the muscle to keep up with America's hunger for rail, setting the stage for its rise as an industrial powerhouse. By the middle of the 19th century, Baldwin Locomotive Works had become the name to beat in American railroading. The company's edge came from more than just hard work. It was built on a stream of technical breakthroughs and a relentless push for efficiency. In the mid-1840s, Baldwin's engineers began producing standardized interchangeable parts, a practice that slashed assembly time and made repairs quicker for railroads across the country. This approach, known as the American system of manufacturing, gave Baldwin a crucial advantage. Orders could be filled faster, quality stayed consistent, and costs dropped, making Baldwin locomotives the preferred choice for growing rail networks. Behind the scenes, the company's leadership structure evolved to match its ambitions. After Matthias Baldwin's death in 1866, the business shifted from a family-led shop to a formal corporation, bringing in engineering visionaries like Samuel M. Vauquelin and William L. Austin. Their board meetings focused on raising capital for new facilities and keeping a steady flow of patents coming out of the drafting rooms. By 1890, Baldwin Locomotive Works had officially incorporated, unlocking new ways to fund expansion and invest in large-scale production. The company's patent portfolio grew rapidly, covering everything from flexible beam trucks to advanced steam systems. These innovations, combined with disciplined management, made Baldwin the world's largest locomotive manufacturer by the turn of the century, with a reputation for reliability that stretched from coast to coast. By the late 19th century, Baldwin locomotives were crossing far more than American borders. Crates stamped with the Philadelphia mark arrived at ports from Havana to Yokohama. Contracts with Cuba's sugar railways and Brazil's sprawling networks kept the order books full, even as tariffs and shifting currencies complicated each deal. In 1899, when most exporters to Brazil saw business shrink, Baldwin's shipments actually rose, outpacing local rivals by more than 6%. Japanese railways, hungry for reliable engines, placed orders for custom-built Baldwins suited to their narrow-gauge lines. In Russia, long before the revolution, the Tsar's railways ran American steam across the steppe. British colonial railroads in Africa and Asia turned to Baldwin when local suppliers could not meet demand. Each contract required more than a handshake. Agent networks spanned continents, and American banks formed consortia to finance deliveries. Export maps from company archives show a web of destinations: South Africa, the United Kingdom, and dozens more. Baldwin's reach meant its engines hauled freight and passengers on nearly every continent, building a reputation that made the company's name as familiar in Sao Paulo and Cape Town as it was in Philadelphia. The global scale brought new rewards and new risks as the company's fortunes became tied to the world beyond American rails. War transformed Baldwin from an industrial powerhouse into a national asset. In 1918, as World War I raged, the company's Eddystone plant ran around the clock. Machines thundered through the night, and the workforce swelled to fill every shift. That year alone, Baldwin produced a staggering 3,580 locomotives, more than any other year in its history. The United States Army depended on these engines to move troops and supplies across Europe, and Baldwin delivered, shipping hundreds of standard 280 consolidations overseas. The same pattern repeated during World War II. Eddystone's assembly lines pushed harder than ever, reaching a peak output of 2,200 locomotives in 1944. The war effort demanded not just numbers, but speed and precision. To keep pace, Baldwin recruited thousands of new workers, including women who joined the ranks as welders, machinists, and inspectors. For many, it was their first time in heavy industry, and their presence changed the rhythm of the plant. Childcare centers opened near the factory gates, and union newsletters described the sense of urgency and pride that gripped the workforce. These years tested Baldwin's limits. Every available hand was put to use, every machine pressed to its maximum. Wartime orders stretched the company's capacity to the breaking point, but they also cemented its reputation as a backbone of American industry. At its height, Baldwin Locomotive Works was more than just a factory. It was the heart of a community. The company payroll swelled to nearly 9,500 workers, a mix of skilled machinists, welders, draftsmen, and laborers, each with families who depended on the steady rhythm of the plant's whistle. The scale of Baldwin's operations demanded more than just hands on the assembly line. It called for a network of support that reached far beyond the factory gates. Rows of modest homes filled Baldwin Village, a neighborhood built by the company where workers could walk to their shifts and children played in shared yards. The company didn't just provide jobs, it invested in lives. The Baldwin Technical Institute, open after hours, offered night classes in machining, drafting, and mathematics, giving both employees and local teenagers a shot at skilled work in an era when such chances were rare. Recreation halls hosted dances and union meetings, while the company funded a local school and even supported neighborhood churches. Pay envelopes brought security, but these programs created a sense of belonging. For many families, Baldwin wasn't just an employer, it was the anchor of daily life, shaping a world where the clang of steel and the promise of advancement went hand in hand. The company's success was measured not only in locomotives shipped, but in the thousands of lives it held together, forging a community as strong as the engines it sent out across the rails. Railroad executives gathered around balance sheets and timetables, searching for any edge that could keep their lines profitable. The numbers told a clear story. Diesel-electric locomotives, once a novelty, now promised to cut operating costs in ways steam could never match. Fuel bills dropped by half or more. Maintenance shops, once crowded with crews tending to boilers and valves, grew quiet as diesels ran for days without major service. Where a steam engine might need a team of 20, including firemen, oilers, and water tenders, a diesel could run with just 4 or 5. Railroads calculated the savings in real time, with fewer breakdowns, less time idling at water towers, and a sharp drop in the coal and water deliveries that once defined the rhythm of railroading. For companies already facing tight margins, these changes were not theoretical. Every mile a diesel ran meant dollars saved and hours gained. The appeal was simple: longer hauls, fewer stops, and a workforce that could be trimmed without sacrificing reliability. In boardrooms from Chicago to Philadelphia, the message was hard to ignore. Steam, once the heart of American industry, suddenly looked expensive and outdated. The market's appetite shifted almost overnight, and for the first time in a century, Baldwin's customers began to ask not for more powerful steam engines, but for the new diesels that promised to transform the economics of rail. Inside Baldwin's boardroom, confidence in steam power ran deep. Samuel Vauclin, the company's longtime engineering mind and former president, believed the future still belonged to the technology that had made Baldwin great. Even as railroads across the country began placing orders for diesel electrics, the board pored over minutes and reports, weighing the risks of abandoning their tried-and-true methods. Between 1938 and 1944, proposals to accelerate diesel development met with skepticism. Some directors argued that steam's reliability and Baldwin's vast investment in specialized tooling made a pivot too costly and uncertain. Others dismissed the early diesel successes as overhyped, convinced that improvements in steam efficiency would keep their engines on the rails for decades to come. The company's first standard diesel line didn't reach the market until the late 1930s, years behind competitors. By then, Electromotive and Alco were already delivering mainline diesels that railroads eagerly adopted. Baldwin's own diesels were largely confined to yard-switching duties, leaving the lucrative freight and passenger contracts out of reach. The board's hesitation locked the company into a shrinking market as steam orders dwindled and rivals captured the future. The miscalculation wasn't just technical, it was a decisive error in judgment, one that set Baldwin on a path from industry leader to follower, with consequences that would soon be felt on every balance sheet and factory floor. Revenue at Baldwin Locomotive Works plummeted after the war. In 1945, the company brought in $140 million. By 1952, that figure had shrunk to just $68 million. Debts mounted, reaching $30 million as sales dried up and fixed costs remained stubbornly high. Finance executives scrambled to keep operations afloat. The numbers told a grim story. Orders for steam engines vanished, and the new diesel market was already dominated by faster-moving rivals. Hopes for a lifeline faded in 1950, when the U.S. government halted a contract to supply locomotives to the Soviet Union, leaving partially finished engines on the shop floor and millions in expected revenue unrecoverable. With cash reserves dwindling and creditors circling, Baldwin's leadership was forced to consider painful restructuring. The company that once powered the world's railways now faced a financial crisis that threatened its very survival. Baldwin's engineers worked overtime in the late 1940s, rushing out new diesel models in hopes of winning back lost ground. But the results fell short. Their diesel-electrics struggled with reliability issues, and railroads complained about breakdowns and inconsistent performance. In 1951, production dipped to just 1,100 locomotives, a fraction of what the company once turned out in a single year. Desperation led to a merger with Lima Hamilton, another steam-era holdout. The new Baldwin Lima Hamilton company tried to combine resources, but clashing corporate cultures and overlapping designs only deepened the confusion. Instead of a fresh start, the merger produced more failed experiments and missed delivery deadlines. By the early 1950s, confidence in Baldwin's comeback had faded. Orders dried up, and the industry's faith in the once mighty builder was gone. Each attempt to regain its footing only underscored how far the company had fallen behind. On July 18, 1956, the last Baldwin locomotive left the Eddystone plant, ending more than a century of production. The closure swept away 4,000 jobs, leaving families and neighborhoods without the steady work that had shaped daily life for generations. Across the country, preserved engines like Southern Pacific 2479 and Milwaukee Road 261 stand as reminders of what American industry once achieved. These machines are maintained by volunteers, engineers, and museum staff who see them as living history. Historians point to Baldwin as a warning and a lesson. Innovation alone is not enough if leadership cannot adapt to change. The company's rise and fall echo in today's debates over how to keep manufacturing resilient, and they remind us that even giants can stumble if they cling too tightly to the past. American industry still faces the same crossroads Baldwin did: adapt or be left behind. Today, over 90% of U.S. rail freight moves on diesel-electric power. It is a direct result of choices made after World War II. The cost of missing the next wave of innovation grows higher each year. History doesn't just repeat, it warns. How we respond now writes tomorrow's legacy. What do you think? Are we listening?